This video is going to cover making rooms joinable. So as you can see over here, we have this new search bar with a list of rooms that we can join that have this green little plus button and a list of rooms that we're currently a member of. So without searching anything over here, you can see that Dean is in the general and the testing room, and John is in the general and the testing room as well. And these are the list of rooms that have the letter E in it that John hasn't joined yet. So if I were to backspace this and search for tests, there's not going to be any results, but I know that there's a content creator room. So if I search for content creator, that shows up. We're also debouncing the search results so that we don't spam the database with the search every time we type a letter. The other thing we're doing is we're making sure that we don't hit the database if the search bar is empty. Over here, you can see that Dean is an admin, which means he still has the ability to create these rooms. John, of course, doesn't. And the final thing that we change in this video is the app should be mobile responsive. So it now manages to collapse properly. So that's the basic idea of what we're going to be covering today. Let's go ahead and let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and stop the server, and I'm going to come over to my other application here. And the first thing that I want to do, I guess, is we can start the server just to see where we're at with the current application. So let me refresh. So this is where we last left off, I guess, with these rooms right here. And I guess John is having some issues with his image. What we can do is we can start by just grabbing the style sheets. Now I'll have a link to this in the video description. This is just from the repositories episode 9 page. And we're just going to replace the style sheets. You can do a git diff if you want to see what changed, but for the most part, it's just really not that interesting to always go through CSS and stuff like that. So I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code in the browser. All you have to do is press the dot or the period on your keyboard, and that should open this up in a browser. And then I can come over here to episode 9, app, assets, style sheets, application.css. I can copy this. I can paste this in here. It did a couple changes to how the vertical height is calculated as well as how the body is calculated. It did some other stuff to make that resize properly. And then at the bottom here, you should see a whole bunch of new classes for stuff that we'll be adding. The other thing we're going to do is come into the chat room, and we're going to copy this one as well. I'm going to come over to this chat room, and we're just going to paste it in. And the reason why we're changing the chat room over here a little bit is just because when we upload the messages, now that things are resized, we had to move the message bar back to where it needs to be. Okay, that seems to all be working. It looks like some of the attachments aren't though. So what I'm actually going to do is just do a Rails DB : drop command to drop the database. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a Rails DB : migrate command to migrate the database, and then I'll do a Rails. Okay, so we're actually going to take a slight detour here. I tried to do a Rails DB : migrate. It didn't work. And that's because of this initializer we have here. So we're actually going to finally fix this. We're going to move this out. So we're going to delete this, hit Control S to save. Then we're going to come over to our config, our initializers, and we're going to create a file called user_status.rb. So this is now going to be our user status initializer. We're going to click on it, and I'm going to full screen this. Basically what we're doing is we're creating a module in here with the class of user status for the application. And then inside of this, we are calling a config.afterInitializeDo, which just creates a connection to the active record base. It checks if the table for the users exists, and then it checks if the user status exists. If both of those are true, it runs a user.updateAll. If they aren't true, it just says, oops, couldn't update the statuses. So if I run a Rails C now, I should have a user. So I'm going to say user.first. Their status is set to offline. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to run a Rails S. I'm going to restart the server, go to start chatting. And in here, my status is now set to online. So I'm going to stop the server. Well, I guess now it's set to away, but if I run a Rails C, I expect, we're not going to see the change here because it can't talk to the database anymore, but I expect if I do a user.first for the status to be offline. So there we can see that it's working. If for some reason it can't work, it'll just tell us that the user couldn't be updated. So to test that, what we can actually do is just do a Rails DB : drop command. And now if we try to do a Rails DB : migrate command, we'll get the error I was getting before, but more importantly, right here, it tells us user status not updated. So if you don't want that, you can just get rid of the print. But in my case, what I can actually do is do a Rails DB, and let me full screen to make sure you can see this. I can run a Rails DB :setup, and that'll run the DB create, and then it'll run the DB migrate. And then you can see here it says user status is not updated. So now if I run a Rails C, that still works. It's actually updating the user status there. Otherwise it would have thrown an error. But of course now I don't have a user account, so let me go make that real quick. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've made the account. In case you're wondering how long it took me to figure out how to do all of this, I'm now 44 minutes into this recording. So this will be a fun one to edit. So we have 3 migrations we need for this episode. The first one is going to be, if I bump up this font size a bit, we need to do a Rails G model. We're going to create a joinable model. We're going to give it a user : belongs _2 and a room : belongs _2. So basically what we're doing with this is we're creating the joinable join table, which allows a user to have many rooms that it belongs to, and it allows a room to have many users that it belongs to. So that's how we can check if a user has joined a room or if a room has a user that has joined it. The other one that we want to add is going to be our good old Rails G migration, add role to user, and we're going to give each user a role of type integer. So this is just what we're using to create our admin accounts and our normal user accounts. And the last one that we're going to add is a Rails G migration, add _current _room _2 user. We're going to give each user a current _room of type integer. And we can go ahead and hit enter on that one. Now I'll do a Rails DB :migrate command to migrate the database. And then I'll run a Rails S to start the server. Okay, so now I can close all of this and actually get started with the tutorial. So if we open up our app, models, and our joinable, this is all we need in here, just the belongs to for the user in the room. If we open up our room.rb, and I full screen this, we need to add a little bit down here because a room now has many joinables, which are going to be dependent destroy. Because if we delete the room, then we want the joinables to be gone too, because then a user no longer has this room as a joined room, right? The other thing we need to do is say has many. And I actually changed this. Instead of doing :users, I thought it'd be cool if we did :joined _users. That way we can see sort of how this works. We're going to do it through the joinables table, which we need right up here. And then it's going to have a source of user. So we create this, like, in all honesty, you could have this users right here. It would be fine. But instead we're doing a joined users through this join table. And then we tell it what model the joined user actually is because it doesn't know based on joined users. That takes care of our room.rb. We now need to deal with our user.rb. Now in here, we're going to have right here, we're going to say has many joinables, dependent : destroy. And then it's going to has many joined rooms through joinables with a source of room. The other thing we can do is right below this, we can say enum role %i, and then user and admin. Now you can either run a migration to set the user role, which would just set it to a default value of 0, I believe. Alternatively, you can do an after initialize. So what we can do is we can say after initialize, set default role. We don't need a default status though. We just need this to say if, and then new record. And it just created a whole bunch of extra code for us. GitHub Copilot seems to think it's helping. So we do this new record. This is an existing method. That's fine. But for the set default role, we need this method right here. And we can actually take this and we can move it down to the private section down here. So that should be good for that. Let me go ahead and reload the application. Okay, let me try to start the server because the server seems to be struggling a little bit. There we go. Let me try a Rails C. And then we'll just do u equals user.first and then u.role, which is set to nil because we did that after we initialized it. So let's set this equal to admin and then do a u.save. Let's now come out of here and do a Rails S again. We'll refresh the page. I'm going to open up my old incognito server and I'm going to sign up. Hey, I'm creating john@doe.com. It's good to me. And now what I'll do is I'll open up a Rails console in my VS Code. So I'll say Rails C, and then I'll just do user.last.role. And we can see that he is set to a user role. So this one will be our default user and this one will be our admin. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we're going to start implementing some of the logic for our autocomplete. Now this is all based on some stuff by SupeRails. I'll have a link to both the article as well as the YouTube video in the video description. So if you're interested in just doing a basic Hotwire Turbo Streams autocomplete, this will fully cover it. So if you're looking to branch off of this tutorial and just do it on your own, this is a lovely way to have it covered for you without having to infer based on what I do here. So again, I'll have a link to both of those in the video description. So we go ahead and full screen and we're gonna close this because we need to create a helper. We're gonna create this in the rooms helper. In here, we're gonna say def search _ rooms end. And now what we want to do is we want to check if params.dig, and I'm actually going to change my space size here to be, I think, 2. So params.dig name _ search dot present. So if we have the name search parameter present and params.dig name search dot length is greater than 0. Okay, apparently it's already suggesting this. So this isn't right. We need this to just return an empty array if we make it this far. For our @rooms here, I just reformatted it. We have the room.where, and actually what I want this to be is room.public _ rooms.where, because we're only searching rooms that aren't direct messages with people. So we're going to grab the public rooms, which comes from our room.rb model, where we have the scope for the public rooms that just checks is private false. So we do the room.public rooms.where name, and this needs to be I-like because we're using Postgres. And then params.dig name search, that's fine. But what I'd actually like to do first is come up here and do another .where. And for this one, we want to say, what is it? ID not in question mark, comma, current _ user dot joined _ rooms dot pluck ID. Okay, and now that we've done both of those, we'll order it by name : ASC. And although this seems inefficient, this actually just creates a proxy where it does the first where and then the second where, and after all of this is done, it'll then hit the database. So we're not hitting the database here multiple times. It's just setting up for when you run this entire SQL query, it's going to have all of this in that query instead of running it multiple times to select all of these, just in case that's something that you're concerned with. I'm actually going to get rid of this @rooms here and try to tab this stuff over to a place where it's reasonable, but I'd like this to be tabbed over one. Okay, so that takes care of our rooms helper. The reason why we do this is because we're going to be using this rooms helper in both of our controllers that use this logic. So let's come over to our controllers now. We'll start in the rooms controller, I guess. And what we do is currently we have @rooms equals room.public rooms. Instead, we're going to call a method called search _ rooms, which comes from our rooms helper here, which means we have to come up top here and say include the rooms helper. Now we're also going to have to include this in our users controller in a minute here. The other thing we want to do is up top here, we want to say @joined rooms equals current user dot joined rooms. Once we have that, we are good to go with the index action. Down here, this @rooms needs to once again be search rooms. We also need a @joined rooms equal to current user dot joined rooms. For this Pagey messages, we're going to say .messages.includes : user to reduce on some of our database hits. It's just going to grab the user for the message and include it with the query so that you don't have to do message.user every time and hit the database when you do it. Instead, when you call message.user, it'll already be stored. And I think that's it for this show action here. Now we do use a search action in this one. So we're going to come down below this create, and we're going to do a def create, or not def create, def search end. And for this, we're going to say at rooms equals search rooms. We're not going to render the index. Instead, we're going to do a respond to do format. I'm going to bump up the font size one here because I'm starting to feel like this might be hard to read. And instead of doing a format.js, what we should do is we should do a format.turbostream do. And then here we want to do a render turbo stream : and we want to do a turbo underscore stream dot update for search results, which is something else we haven't made yet. And it looks like it's already picking this up from my GitHub profile, which is a little bit weird. But we're going to do locals set to that, and then I'm going to enter this down so it looks a little bit better. I pushed this code up earlier. It's a little bit strange that it's already getting it contextually. And this actually needs to be a square bracket, not braces. And there we go. So that looks good. Two other things we need to create in here, and then I promise we're done dealing with this controller, is going to be a def join action. And this is just going to be how we create the links to join our rooms. So we're going to have a at room equals room.find params ID, just like we normally would. And we're going to have a current underscore user dot joined rooms, which again is that thing we made earlier in our user model right here. So we're adding to the joinables table. And we're just going to add the room to that. Once we're done with that, we're going to redirect to the at room. Now, the other thing we need to do is essentially that same method, but instead we're going to say def leave end. We're going to grab the at room. We're going to do current user.joinedrooms.delete at room. And then we're going to redirect to the rooms path. You could, of course, skip the redirects here. I just prefer to have them for my own user experience. Now that we have those, we should come down to our config and our routes.rb file. So for the search, we need to do a collection do, and we want to post to the search. And then down here, we need to do two gets. We're going to do a get for rooms/leave/:ID. Beautiful. GitHub Copilot knows what I want. And we're going to do a get for the rooms join ID. And we're going to do both to that controller and the action. And then we're going to name it leave room and join room, which is going to turn this into the equivalent of leave underscore room underscore path and join underscore room underscore path. And of course, you do need to pass in the ID. That is correct. So that's why we do the as at the end there, just to make life a little bit easier. Okay, now we should come up to the users controller. And just like in the rooms controller, we need to include this helper. So let's grab that over here, paste it in. Now below the at room, we want to do an at joined rooms, which is going to be current user.joined rooms. At rooms is now going to be search underscore rooms, which we're getting from our helper. This messages should do an includes again for the user. I think the rest of this can stay the same. Now let's come down to our JavaScript channels and our appearance channel. We're going to come down here to the reset timer because I did have a question about this. And the way this is set up right now, you have to do everything in seconds. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to create a const time in minutes. Time in minutes equal to time in seconds times 60 times milliseconds. Then we're going to say const number of minutes equals 5. Then your time in milliseconds is just going to be your time in minutes times the number of minutes. And now this will be delayed by this number of minutes right here. So you could even set this to be number of minutes to be delayed. So that takes care of our appearance channel. The next thing we want to do is come into the scroll controller. Because we're going to be changing how the application looks a little bit, we do need to change some logic in here. First thing we want to change is this after initialize. This is fine, but we also want to do this after our connect. I actually think that's it for this controller. Okay, let's come into our views, rooms, and our index.html.erb file. We're going to scroll down to our rooms right here, and right now we're rendering at rooms. We're actually going to change this to render at joined rooms, which is why we set it in that controller. Now I'm actually going to refresh just for the sake of doing a sanity check. I'm going to hit start chatting. So we don't have any rooms listed here. What I'd like to do is create the ability to see these rooms, but I also want to limit this rooms right here to just be an admin only thing. So let's do the admin only thing first. That I believe is just in the new room form. What we want to do in here is we just want to do a check if the current underscore user dot admin, because I think we're already checking if the user is logged in. So that should work. Let me now refresh. That looks good. Let me click start chatting here and I no longer see that search bar. So that looks good to me. Let's now create in our rooms folder a partial that we're going to call underscore search underscore form.html.erb. Inside this search form, we're going to do a form with a URL of search underscore rooms underscore path, a method colon post, and an ID of room underscore search underscore form. And then we're going to say do form. And I'm actually going to hit enter down here by the method and again by the ID just to make this a little bit more readable. I'm going to come down here, do an end, and then we can go ahead and get started with this. The first thing, and actually the only thing we need in here, is our search field input. So this is suggesting this, but it's actually not what we need. We're going to say form.search underscore field. We're going to call this name underscore search. It's going to have a class of form control. That's actually going to change to be a class of room underscore search underscore field. We don't need the autocomplete off. Instead, we'll do a placeholder where we'll say search rooms to join ... And then I think that's good for that one. Now down here, we want to do a div with an ID of search results. And in here, we want to render a partial, which is going to be rooms slash search underscore results. And then we're going to pass in a collection of rooms that is at rooms. So now we have to make this search results partial. So we'll come over to rooms, right click new file, underscore search underscore results.html.erb. And in here, we want to do a rooms.each do room. And for this one, we can actually come into our users and our underscore user.html.erb and just grab, I guess, this entire block. Sure, why not? We'll paste it in. The entire icon container can go away though. Instead of doing a link to the user.email, we want to do a link to the room.name. It's a link to the room path now that takes in an ID of room.id, and it takes in a name underscore search that is params name underscore search. And it doesn't have this class right here, but it does have this data turbo false. So we can tab this, or let me just hit save and it'll save all of this. So let me exit out of this and refresh the page. Nothing changed. The reason why is we have to actually add this partial to our index page. So we want to render this right below the new room form. So we're going to say render rooms/search_form. Save that, refresh again. So now we can search for rooms to join. We can search for, I think, general is a room. We can see that nothing's appearing. Actually, I don't think general is even a room yet. So let me try to create general. There is our general room. Okay, apparently I just had to refresh the page again. I don't know why it wasn't working when I refreshed previously. So maybe try Control-Shift-R to clear all of your stuff. So we know general exists. Actually, I'm willing to bet it's because I hit create room and it added it to the list. We know that general exists. The issue is how do we get it to populate this search result here? And in here, what we want to do is, again, going to be similar to our user. So let me grab this, come back to our room, and I'll paste this in. Now, this is instead going to be if at room, but no at. And if, let's see now, and we're going to check if the room.eql, the current_user.current_room_ID. If that's the case, we'll set it to active. We also need to change this user list item to be a room list item. And then basically all of this can get removed. Instead, what we'll do is a link to the room.name, which is a link to the room, a data of turbo false, and a class of ms-2 me-auto. Now do another one down here, and we'll start to render out our links. So say rooms/joinable link, and we'll take a room of room. So now we have to create this partial. So we'll right click, new file on rooms. We'll say _joinable_link.html.erb. And here what we want to do is a if the current_user.has_joined_room. If the user has joined this room, we want to do a link to the leave room path. We'll pass in the room. We'll give this a method : delete do end. And then in here, we just want to do a I with a class equal to bi, with a class equal to bi dash the word dash square, and then room dash leave dash link dash icon, end quotes, and then we can close this. We can actually copy this and we can paste this down here inside of an else. So if the user hasn't joined this room already, then we want to link to the join room path, which means we need this to be the room dash join dash link icon. We need this to be the bi plus square. So let's do that, refresh. Nothing will change here, which means we need to come into our search results. And in here we want to do the same thing. So we'll do a render the room/joinable_link. We'll pass in a room of room. So now if we come over here and refresh and we search for general, we're actually missing some stuff here, which is probably my fault. This needs a value of params name_search. And I think, oops, a comma here as well. So we'll save that, refresh. And this on input, because I wasn't paying attention, actually needs to be down here, I believe. Okay, now that we've updated this, we're running into an issue with Turbo, and it doesn't have access to the current user room ID. So we're actually going to take this, we're going to come over here, and we're going to get rid of this active class for now. We'll visit this in a later episode because Turbo is a little bit of a pain to get working with Devise and stuff. Now back in this joined link, we actually need to grab this has joined room. And we need to come into the user.rb, Down here, we'll do a def has joined room end. And it actually needs to take in a room as an argument. We want to say joined underscore rooms dot include question mark and the room. Default, we do have an empty class here. Let's get rid of that. Make sure this is the room list icon. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to just keep going here because I can't actually figure out what's wrong with the search bar right now. So instead of doing this on input here, we're going to go ahead with what I did next, which was I attached this form to a controller called debounce, which means the input here needs a data binding as well for an action that will be input debounce controller, and we'll call the search, or we'll call the action search. Now this means we need a search, or we need a debounce controller. So let me stop the server, full screen this, and I'll bump up the font size a bit. You need to do a Rails G stimulus, and we're going to call this debounce, and that will generate a stimulus controller for us. I can now run a Rails S to start the server again, and I can full screen this. We can come up to our JavaScript controllers debounce controller. And here we're going to give this a class name. We'll call it debounce. We'll give it a static form equal to document.getElementById room underscore search underscore form. We'll do a static input equal to document.getElementById. We'll call this name underscore search. When we connect, we'll do a this.clear param debounce.input. So whenever this controller connects, it's going to grab the input and it's going to clear this input's value. So we do actually need to create this function. So we call it clear param, takes in an input. And what it does is it says if the input dot value is equal to the empty string, then we want to do const base URL equals location dot origin plus location dot path name. Then we do a window dot history dot push state, takes in the empty string, and the base URL. The last thing we have to do is that search action that we talked about. Just going to do a clear timeout for this dot timeout, and then it's going to do a this dot timeout equals set timeout, and then we do debounce dot form dot request submit. We come down here and we set the time to 500. So basically what this does is it makes sure that no matter how many times you search or you type in the search bar, the submit request to the form is only going to fire if you're done typing for like 500 milliseconds or half a second. So that just stops it. If you're sitting here and you're searching for like test, it'll wait until you're done and then it'll fire the search. So now if we refresh, I type test, you can see here, select rooms from rooms where room is private equals 1 and ID not in null. So this is getting null, and name I like test order by rooms. So the fact that this is null is interesting. So let's come up to our rooms helper. Let me try to get rid of this ID not in first. So that's working. So there's an issue here with my logic. Of course there is. Okay, I figured it out. And by figured it out, I mean Stack Overflow figured it out. So my previous syntax here was this. And what we changed it to was this. So I still had the not inside of the query. Instead, it just wants the not outside of it like this. And it could even just be some weird logic here. But if we get rid of this, and we now have .where.not, like we do here, we now manage to grab this if we are not in any room. So if I type in E, I now get general and test. I can join general. I can search for E, and now I get it. Let me just make sure this works. Let me leave the general, join general, Okay, and it seems like it's working on refresh. So let me keep going and we'll see if that problem resolves itself. Let me come over to the views, joinable link, and in here, let me do this. Let me say data turbo false for the joinable link, like that. Refresh, leave the general, search general. There we go. Now it's working. So I think the reason why it wasn't working was because it was getting confused. Without the turbo false, it's not a full redirect, so it doesn't know that we've joined the room yet. But now this seems to be working just fine with the delay there. Now, the other thing that I changed, of course, was this create room button. So let's come into our layouts and our new room button. In here, we're doing the check for the admin, but the one thing we need to do is we want to give the form a new class of new-room-input. Sorry, we want to give the input a new class. And we want to give it a placeholder. So I'll put a comma here, placeholder. I put admins only -create room. And then down here on the f.submit, we have class btn-success, and then new-room-button. So if I refresh, we now have the ability to create a new room here. So I'll create one for like content creators. And now we run into an issue with the Devise warden again. So this is for the check if the current user has joined the room, which is in the... So I think the best solution until we fix all of the turbo stuff is going to be to change this from a turbo redirect when we create a room to a normal redirect. So we'll come into our rooms controller, we have the create action where we create the room, and then we'll do a redirect to the @room. So I'll refresh again, and now I'll create another one that I call, I don't know, like sysadmins or sysadmin. I click create room. It's still throwing that issue, which means our submit button here probably needs to be, let's change this to turbo false again. Now let's refresh and we'll create a room in here called, I don't know, test2. Really doesn't like that. Room.rb, broadcast, after create commit, broadcast of public. Let's get rid, well, let's comment that out for now, actually. Refresh. So we can search for the admin room. Let's create another one for like reading, I guess. There we go. So now it seems to be working. Okay, so in a following episode, we'll have a solution for fixing all of the turbo links. Now, I guess what I can say for that is you need multiple turbo streams with multiple different templates because you don't have access to the current user and you can't really store it in a singleton. So instead, what you have to do is in your model, you have to do a broadcast where you check if the current user is an admin, if the current user is a regular user, if the current user isn't the person that made the thing, and then you have to do a check if there is no user, which in this case is fine because we're not logged in. But that's a whole bunch of logic that's a little bit too much to cover in this video, especially since my version of it's already been going for 2 hours and I have to cut this all down in a little bit here. I think that's about it for this video. If you're interested in more about how this whole admin setup works, I'll have a link to a Devise admin role video on the screen right now.